Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bitcoin Not Crypto. You can find me on X and Twitter at Forrest Hodel. And today I'm going to be talking about the biggest and best moments of 2024 for Bitcoin. There were some not so great moments, and I'll give those a mention as well. But 2024 has been huge for Bitcoin. So I want to get into all of these. There's so many interesting things. When you're in the day-to-day of Bitcoin, reading the news, all this kind of stuff, it all just kind of gradually happens. But when you look back at a full 365 days, you realize how many monumental moments there were. And I'm going to talk about every one of them that I could think of. Before I do that, however, I want to tell you about Bitcoin Well, which is where I get all of my Bitcoin. They're a non-custodial exchange with the lowest fees, which means that they never hold your Bitcoin for you. You send the money, they send you Bitcoin directly to your hardware wallet or over the Lightning Network. They also have non-KYC options available. They're available in the US and Canada, and they have an OTC desk for white glove service for people buying over $50,000 worth of Bitcoin. You can actually get yourself some free Bitcoin by using my link in the description or my code, which is Bitcoin Not Crypto. Thanks everyone for checking that out. So some big things happen in Bitcoin, as I said, and this is in no particular order, but I will kind of lump all of the political and US-centric kind of politician events all into one segment. But first, I'll start with the ETF. The Bitcoin ETFs getting approved for spot Bitcoin trading ETFs was huge. And it ushered in a giant move upwards in the price of Bitcoin. This happened in the beginning of the year in springtime. And it ended up being the best performing ETF of all time on many metrics. The main metric being the fastest accumulation of assets under management for one single ETF, which is BlackRock's IBIT. And then overall, they had a huge amount of performance and accumulation of assets under management that beat all sorts of different records. Options on those ETFs also got approved, which is a big deal. This allows people to hedge their positions. Basically, if we end up going into the traditional kind of four-year cycle into a bear market at the end of next year, then we will be able to hedge our bets in a fiat nominated sense, where we could actually hold cold storage Bitcoin, but we could also buy some puts on these ETFs, and they would hedge any downside that we have in our holdings. So that's a huge thing, really. Those options on those ETFs, we haven't really seen that play out. We haven't seen a lot of what's happened in 2024 actually play out, because all of these things are foundational. They end up playing out over years and years and years. We have seen massive price appreciation with Bitcoin this year, and that goes to my third thing here, which is Bitcoin hit 100,000. 100K is a big psychological number, but it's also just a big number in dollar terms, in US dollar terms. It's significant. It brought some attention to Bitcoin, and it was something that we've waited a long time for. If you're here from the last cycle, then you realized, 100K was something that we were aiming at then, and it didn't happen. There was sort of the beginning of the bear market from all of the FTX and Three Arrows Capital and all this kind of stuff kind of robbed us from the 100K that we wanted to see then, but now we've hit it now, of course, and that was huge for 2024. Another thing that happened in 2024 was an all-time high before the halving. The halving itself was also a monumental thing that happened. We saw that supply issuance get cut in half to 3.125, and we know that the halving works. The programming works. The code works. Every time that happens, every roughly 4 years, it is just more evidence and more proof that Bitcoin is performing the way it should at the base programming code level, which is very important to see. This is just more evidence that this is a long-term thing that will continue to perform the way it's supposed to. We also saw our first 10K candle in one single day, our daily 10K candle. That's the first time that's ever happened. It happened in 2024. That is huge. There was times, the first 1K candle was hit many years ago, and that was monumental. People didn't think that was going to happen. And now we have hit the 10K candle. I mean, what's next, right? The 20K, the 30K. What's next? The Omega candle that Samson Mao talks about. It sounds crazy now, but eventually that may be normal. Who knows? We saw El Salvador hit 6,000 Bitcoin in their reserves. The first nation to adopt it as legal tender has hit 6,000 Bitcoin. They also bought 11 Bitcoin, 10 extra over the 1 Bitcoin per day they've been buying. So they've bought an 11 Bitcoin twice in the year 2024, which is just an increase in the amount and basically a signal that they are doubling down on their Bitcoin strategy. Now, with that, I'll say as well, and this is maybe some of the news that isn't as good, right? I'm going to sprinkle that in throughout, but they've also pulled back on some of the Bitcoin law that was first implemented. And with that, they have made it voluntary for businesses to accept Bitcoin. I also have done a full video on all of the different things. They've done more than that, but there's a video, I'll link it in the description, or just look up in my channel about El Salvador's changes to their Bitcoin laws. Hong Kong created some Bitcoin ETFs, and so did Australia, actually, for that matter. Hong Kong's ETFs are pretty significant, though, because this allows a certain demographic of Chinese to get back into Bitcoin after having it sort of criminalized, and their ability to access the Bitcoin and larger crypto markets have been kind of revoked. So the Hong Kong is sort of a little bit of an onboarding, sort of a little bit of a gateway for them to be able to access Bitcoin again. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, has been a huge marketer of Bitcoin. He's gone on to say that he was wrong about Bitcoin, and now he believes that it holds a place in people's portfolios. And of course, they have the highest AUM Bitcoin ETF out there, so they're selling that a lot. But that's a pretty big deal, having somebody from that space, that position in TradFi, really promote Bitcoin in that way. MicroStrategy. I can't talk about 2024 and not talk about MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy has bought 244,800 Bitcoin in the year 2024. This is a huge amount of Bitcoin, and they are not sellers. They are going to hold that indefinitely, use it as permanent capital on their balance sheet, and create some products and services and cash flowing situations basically in the future inevitably from it. This is huge, and it takes it off of supplies, takes it off of basically the market, and puts it in this place permanently, as far as we can tell. Julian Assange was basically pardoned, or his charges were dropped against him, and he was allowed to go back to his home country of Australia. This is big. I mean, it would have been nice for him to go through the legal situation so that basically what the US government did to him was fully seen by the public. I think they probably just dropped all of these charges and let him free because they didn't want that to happen. However, it's still huge, because what WikiLeaks did and what Julian Assange did, they were huge advocates for Bitcoin early on, and they were the first real big victim of being debanked and not having any allowance of any payment systems to fund WikiLeaks. So they adopted Bitcoin in a big way just by accepting it through their public website. This gave Bitcoin a use case. It allowed an organization like WikiLeaks to continue operating and continue whistleblowing on very important information. And it showed a use case to anybody that was interested in this story, that somebody that was debanked, whether an individual, nation, whatever, if they didn't have access to a payment system, they could adopt Bitcoin because it was permissionless. Even your worst enemy can use Bitcoin, and that's a positive of Bitcoin. With that, right, let's talk about another thing that happened. Putin publicly said that Bitcoin cannot be stopped. This is huge. This is Russia, one of a giant nation out there with its GDP and economy. I mean, not the biggest, obviously, but fairly significant on the geopolitical stage. They have talked about Bitcoin, or he has talked about Bitcoin. They've also revoked their banning of Bitcoin mining, and they've started to set up some regulation where there's certain areas they can't mine based on their energy grid and other areas where they can. So they're kind of fine-tuning and creating actual regulation that will work for Bitcoin adoption in that country. There are now more than 70 public companies that hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And this was hugely sparked by MicroStrategy. Now, I couldn't find exact numbers about how many new ones put it on their balance sheet in 2024. Some of those are from earlier, like MicroStrategy. And, they were a big pioneer in this space. The change in accounting was a big deal with FASB getting adopted, which now doesn't put crypto or Bitcoin into the indefinite intangible asset category, which allows, when it was that way, it made companies only mark down their Bitcoin or crypto holdings to whatever it was lowest at, and didn't allow it to fair value it every single month or quarter, and didn't basically allow the asset appreciation to go on to their earnings. So that change is huge. That's going to lead to a bunch more companies, and continues to lead to companies adopting Bitcoin as a treasury reserve, which just makes a lot of sense. It's a better money than cash, than dollars, right? So why not hold at least some and acquire the positive earnings as it appreciates over time? Another early adopter of Bitcoin and a pioneer in the space, Ross Ulbricht, was promised a pardon by President Trump, when he was running for president. So we will see in 2025 if this actually plays out. Let's, hope. And for Ross and everyone affected by his imprisonment. Ross Ulbricht created the dark web website, the Silk Road, which allowed users to trade drugs, or it was an open marketplace basically for drugs only, not for other criminal kind of activity. And the currency on the website was Bitcoin. He was an early adopter of Bitcoin, and actually a large amount of the Bitcoin that the US holds right now, they hold about 190,000 plus Bitcoin. A large amount of that was from the Silk Road seizure and his arrest. So Ross Ulbricht really paved the way and created another use case, right? Let's not pretend that technology is not adopted by the outsiders at first. I just listened to something where this guy made the comparison of pagers were first adopted by drug dealers and businessmen. Cell phones, again, were first adopted by drug dealers and businessmen. The internet itself was adopted by all of these outsiders. And Bitcoin as well is adopted by outsiders. It's a technology that had one of its first use cases by being able to buy and procure safe drugs, which is a use case. And I think if he's let out, I think that's going to be an amazing thing for the space, and as well an amazing signal to the drug war, which is completely unjust and has spent trillions of dollars worldwide to incarcerate people for using substances, which doesn't really affect other people very much, and should be done in safe ways. And there's a total reform that needs to happen with drugs and substances, in my mind. And that was the philosophy behind Silk Road, and that is actually why he got such a harsh sentence. The judge basically gave him harsher sentences because of his philosophy behind setting up this marketplace. Let's talk about some of the Bitcoin adjacent things as well. Metaplanet was the best performing stock in the entire world, and in Japan it was the best performing stock, and they adopted Bitcoin as a treasury and have been following the footsteps directly of MicroStrategy. They've adopted the metric of Bitcoin yield per share. They've issued debt. They've used their cash flow. They've issued shares to acquire Bitcoin, and they are a very good proxy for Bitcoin because you cannot hold Bitcoin directly as a Japanese citizen in registered accounts. So your only access to that is Metaplanet, and that's why they've performed so well. MicroStrategy has been the best performing stock in the US stock market, and that's because, again, they've adopted Bitcoin and they've acquired a lot of Bitcoin, and even with the added dilution of their shares, they've increased the Bitcoin per share. MicroStrategy's convertible bonds have been the most popular convertible bonds and highest performing in that sector. And Bitcoin itself has been the best performing commodity. That's what it's kind of labeled as this year of 2024. And really, you can just lump that all together and just say anything that's touched Bitcoin has performed extremely well. So that is huge for the year of 2024. Bit of a blunder based on maybe how you see it, but also an opportunity for us to have soaked up some sats if you were keen on it at the time. Germany sells their Bitcoin. They had some laws basically that created the situation where they had to sell their Bitcoin unless those laws changed really rapidly, which is not the way that democracy and politicians work. So they were forced to sell the seized Bitcoin, and now they have the cash that they got from that frozen until a certain period of time anyway. And they sold around 50,000, and if they've waited till now, they would have made billions more, basically. A bit of a mistake on their part. Nice to have that bag of Bitcoin that we knew was going to be a seller kind of out of the way. And with that as well, we can see there's been some other forced sellers onto the market, some big bags of Bitcoin. One of them, the Mt. Gox, they've been holding back from distributing all of the affected people from that bankruptcy for a long time. But in 2024, they started repaying people their Bitcoin, and I think it was all in cash. Don't quote me on that. I haven't done too much research on that one specifically, but a lot of repayments have happened from Mt. Gox. President Trump, the first president to ever use Bitcoin. He used it on the Lightning Network at PubKey, which is a pub in New York that is a Bitcoin bar. And there was a little bit of complication. I think it failed or something like that. Lightning can be a little bit tricky right now because there's different wallets and some of them aren't compatible and all these kind of things. So people will say, oh, that didn't work. Bitcoin's broken, Lightning's broken, whatever. It did eventually work. And yes, it was somebody else kind of doing it for him and all this kind of stuff. But it was still a monumental moment to see Bitcoin used by a president. He was an ex-president at the time running for presidency. Now he's going to be the future president. So it's kind of a big deal that they'd even acknowledge Bitcoin this way, that they would use Bitcoin, and that it worked eventually, after, I think, one failure of the Lightning Network. Multiple states have issued bills that are going to be going through their political process to put Bitcoin on the state's treasury. Now, this is interesting because, and I think a little bit undervalued maybe, because these states have the GDP of certain countries out there. Texas is huge. It's a very profitable state, and they have a Bitcoin bill. Now, they've had to adjust it in some ways where they're not going to be putting their own money into Bitcoin. They'll accept donations and kind of taxes and things like that through Bitcoin. But the other states that I've found that have Bitcoin bills in right now is Pennsylvania and Ohio. So this is really big deal because it's not just the strategic Bitcoin reserve that the US has talked about, but if these individual states as well do this, then that is going to be huge for the price of Bitcoin and the adoption of Bitcoin. And then there's cities on top of that, right? The city of Vancouver has approved a bill to make Vancouver a Bitcoin friendly city and to study how they can implement Bitcoin into what they do. So this doesn't mean that they're going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but it does mean that that could be in the future. So pretty big deal, 2024 that happened. Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have created an organization, or heads of an organization, which is the Department of Government Efficiency. Elon, although he doesn't talk about Bitcoin very much anymore, or basically hasn't in a long time, they do hold almost 10,000 Bitcoin on the treasury of Tesla, which is a big deal. Vivek has also talked positively about Bitcoin and has stated that he owns Bitcoin. So there's going to be these government adjacent organization with these two very prominent figures, very popular figures, who are pro Bitcoin to some degree. And with that as well, Vice President elect Jade Vance has publicly shown an allocation of 5% of his net worth to Bitcoin through an ETF, which is a big deal, right? You're going to prioritize things that that you think are valuable, and especially if you hold them, you're going to want to pump your own bags. So there's going to be a little bit of that. You can see there's a lot of popular politicians right now that have intermeshed themselves with the idea of Bitcoin. Another one of those being RFK, who is the head of the Department of Health or something like that. He's somewhere in the Trump organization that is coming into, will be inaugurated January 20th. And he has talked about how all the money that he made from suing Monsanto, he bought Bitcoin with. He gave his children Bitcoin. I think he holds a huge amount of his net worth in Bitcoin. He's very, very knowledgeable about Bitcoin. He actually does know what it is, as opposed to Trump, who I think has a limited knowledge about Bitcoin. And that comes into Trump. He talked at the 2024 Bitcoin conference, and it was, a speech where he talked about creating a stockpile, which is a big deal, freeing Ross Ulbricht, and also he talked about firing Gary Gensler, which leads into another 2024 moment here, where the head of the SEC, Gary Gensler, has announced that he is resigning. So he has not resigned in 2024, but he announced that he is resigning, and that will happen in early 2025. Cynthia Lummis also announced at Bitcoin 2024, the conference, that she made this bill, wrote this bill up for the U.S. federal government to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury reserve, with the goal of holding 1 million Bitcoin and moving the seized Bitcoin they already have into some sort of treasury position. Some other things that were a bit mixed here. These are a bit mixed moments, but nonetheless fairly big. Tornado Cash, two of the developers were arrested and extradited, and they actually, some judges ruled that their use of code was basically free speech, and they have been vindicated in some way in that sense. So there's that battle, I'm sure, is still ongoing, but it's a push towards freedom of speech and use of open source code. Another thing here that's a bit mixed, Roger Ver, who is an early adopter of Bitcoin and evangelist of Bitcoin, formerly known as Bitcoin Jesus, was arrested for some sort of tax evasion. The U.S. will basically double tax you if you leave the country. Well, they'll tax you, and then you're taxed in your new country as well. And there was some sort of taxes or something like that. Now, Roger Ver is a very interesting character in this space because he basically tried to hijack Bitcoin, even though he wrote a book called Hijacking Bitcoin, saying that the other side did, and he's the victim of this hijacking. But he basically tried to hard fork Bitcoin and have a huge amount of centralization when it came to mining, and a huge amount of centralization when it came to node operating, because his idea was to create larger blocks. But where does that end, right? We need second layers to do some of the scaling, in my opinion, and that's why Bcash, his hard fork, has gone to negative 99% of the value of Bitcoin in real Bitcoin terms. And we can say that the market has chosen that Bitcoin is the real Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash is not. So, let's be people of the free market, and the free market have decided. Nonetheless, though, he has been arrested, and we will see how that goes kind of into 2025, but I would say that's a pretty big deal. He was a very important figure in Bitcoin, and a very important figure in Bitcoin's history, even with this hard fork that he did and, the block size wars and all of that. A couple other kind of maybe smaller things, but there's been some really good media come out about Bitcoin. The HBO created a movie called Money Electric, which brought a lot of light to Bitcoin. Lynn Alden's book, Broken Money, came out. There's a few other things that just aren't coming to me at the moment, but there's been a lot of great Bitcoin content created, or Bitcoin adjacent content created in 2024 that will continue to educate and inspire people to look into Bitcoin. And of course, the biggest moment of 2024 is I created Bitcoin Not Crypto, the podcast. Of course, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people coming into this space. It's a bull run, a lot of excitement, all of that. Hopefully we will all, still be as excited into the bear market or whatever ends up happening in that situation. But, I think we can all deal with a little bit of downside, especially if we've gotten into this a little bit earlier than if we're just finding out and just buying our first amount of Bitcoin today. However, if you want to get in today, check out Bitcoin Well. That goes to support this show, and will go to supporting more episodes, more content, and all of that. So thanks everybody for watching. There's many things I've missed. The 2024 was a huge year for Bitcoin. If we look at all of these things, we can see that, but there's even more, of course, that I've missed. And I would love to hear what those things were in the comment section below. Comment your favorite thing about 2024 and Bitcoin. Thanks everybody for watching.